Vanessa,
Hi.
you'll be happy to know I'm still drinking nettle tea as you recommended.
Oh, amazing. Let's see, we've got some people pouring in. So, welcome everyone. We'll give it about a minute for people to get settled and get in. And in the meantime, I've got a question for you guys that I will stick in the chat. As you're getting in the webinar, you can go ahead and start thinking about all of this. Not to everyone. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just give it a minute. We've got lots of people pouring in. Well, it's hi from Houston. So just give it one more minute. The attendees are still going up very fast, so people are still pouring in. Right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone. My name is Amelia. I'm Project Coyote's communications manager, and I'm really excited to be here today to introduce you to Vanessa Chakour. She is an author, a naturalist, a boxer, boxing coach, and Project Coyote ambassador. And this is episode 2 of Wild Voices. This episode focused on photography and storytelling as advocacy for a more than human world. So, I'm really excited to hear this conversation. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'm gonna pass it off to Vanessa. Thank you, Amelia. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to Sarah. We've gotten to know each other over the last couple of years, and it's been really incredible to just read her work, see her photography, and I'm excited to kind of delve deeper into it today. So I'll read your bio first, Sarah, and then we'll get started. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sarah's work as well, but I'll read her bio just in case. So, Sarah Killingsworth is an award-winning wildlife conservation photographer, filmmaker, and writer who has always loved wildlife and exploring wild places. Passionate about stories of coexistence, especially with native predators, Sarah is inherently curious about the intersection of humans and wildlife habitats, how wildlife adapts to ever-encroaching human development, as well as ways we can work to protect species before they become endangered. A certified California naturalist, Sarah is president of the board of the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin and a member of the Emerging League International League of Conservation Photographers. That's a full sentence. And the NANPA Ethics Committee. She is also the program coordinator for Keeping It Wild Youth Education Outreach Program with Project Coyote. Her images and writing have been published in print and online by a variety of publications, including Smithsonian Magazine, National Wildlife Magazine, The Hill, National Geographic, Bay Nature, and Audubon. You can catch more of her work on Instagram at SK Wildlife Photos and SK Fine Art, or her website, sarahkillingsworth.com. So welcome, Sarah. Very excited to have you here. And I know you have images to share with us as well. So whenever you're ready to share images, go ahead and do so. But for the first question I'd love to ask you is, what first drew you to wildlife photography? And, how did you know, when did you first know that this was your path?
It's a great question, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everybody who's listening. It's fantastic to be here. Um, I took a very indirect path to what I currently do. I really have always loved wildlife and wild places, and the outdoors, and I've had a lifelong photography hobby, but my career path was an anthropology degree, undergraduate, a law degree, a law practice. And it was later in life that I have transitioned into professional wildlife photography and writing and storytelling on behalf of more than human species. So it's been a journey.
Was there a moment or encounter with a particular wild animal or habitat that really inspired you?
Yeah, so I think what I'll do, I will share my screen and let everyone see the beautiful bobcat that
Oh,
really
yes.
put me on this journey. So I have always loved cats, all cats, domestic cats, wild cats. And when I was increasing my interest in photography about 10 years ago, I was taking my own children who were very little out to see wildlife. I was spending time with wildlife myself and felt a particular connection to bobcats and had the really amazing good fortune of being able to observe a mother bobcat raising her kittens. And this is her and one of her three kittens. And I felt like I learned so much in her presence, watching her, and that I got so much out of it myself. It was grounding, it was an education, it was endlessly fascinating to me and my curiosity. So
Sounds
great
like it might be frozen.
to
Maybe.
have the time with it, but I give reciprocity. I, I vote.
Oh, uh-oh. We lost Sarah. Can you hear me okay, Amelia?
Yeah, I can hear you. It sounds like there might have been a connection error on Sarah's part.
Yeah,
Maybe she can reboot and rejoin.
hopefully, yeah.
Sorry about that. Give me 1 second.
That's okay. I wonder if showing the photos and turning the video off might work.
John, I've got to come back in here. Got disconnected from my Wi-Fi while they're recording me. So I
Well, while we're waiting for Sarah to reconnect, I'm going to go ahead and put in the audience question again for you all to think about. I know we've got a couple new people joining, so guys can all think about that as we wait for Sarah to rejoin.
okay. Let's see. I'm going to try sharing again. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see the image now?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
and can you hear me?
can hear you perfectly at the moment. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
Great, that happens.
So as I was saying, I was already on the board of an environmental nonprofit and was doing work with Project Coyote as a wildlife educator. But I felt like I needed to do more to share the stories of this wild mother and how hard she was working to survive, to raise her kittens in a suburban environment. And it was the desire to tell her story that really pushed me into conservation storytelling and pitching stories. The first articles I had published were about her, a suburban bobcat family. So that was really the turning point. And I have a few photos of her in that environment, watching her teach her kittens how to navigate cars and other dangers and just watching her cross roads repeatedly to go get food and bring them back to her kittens. So this is one of the kittens. Here
Mm,
she is bringing food back. Another
oh my
kitten
gosh.
shot. And this is her teaching one of the kittens to hunt. When they're very little, they stay home, they stay in the brush while she's hunting, but eventually as they get older, she brings them out with her. So this was a learning session for this kitten.
Amazing. Oh, just such amazing photos.
And these are some different other bobcats. So I don't know if you want me to stop sharing, I might be able to bring my camera back up. I've changed locations, but I don't know about the stability of the internet. So I could stop share and we could keep talking or.
Well, I just think this is a great moment to pivot to your reading, actually, because I
Oh,
know that
okay.
you think a lot about
Oops.
the perspective of other species, and seeing these photographs of the bobcat. It's if you want to keep the images on screen while you read or turn your camera on, it's totally up to you. But but yeah, I think it would nice to be hear your storytelling voice and then continue our conversation from there. Those images are so incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I won't be able to screen share. I think screen sharing and I can't read and screen share very well is what it looks like. So I'm going to read and then I can go back to screen sharing.
Sounds perfect. Yes.
Sorry about all the technical difficulties. In 6 years of doing webinars, that's the first time that's ever happened. I'm so sorry to everybody for the delay and for the brief departure and rearrival. So this is a piece that is perhaps not surprisingly about a mother bobcat. So, nestled under the coyote brush, the matted grass and loamy soil make a soft bed. Small ants and shiny black beetles work the soil, creating tiny tunnels in the spaces between tufts of grass. The branches overhead are keeping you dry from the leaden thick nighttime fog that coated the grass in glistening dewdrops. You are tired, but beside you, three small, soft, furry babies start wiggling as they wake up. The largest and liveliest of the three quickly climbs over his siblings and pushes up against your spotted stomach, eagerly seeking breakfast. Rubbing his head against your body, he settles in to nurse, laying against you. His two sisters, roused by his wiggling, start to move towards your stomach as well. Walking like drunken sailors on wobbly legs, they make plaintive mews as they come towards you. They quickly find a spot to nurse, and all three kittens nestle in the safe embrace of your limbs. You fall back asleep, nursing all three of them as the sun rises, warming the soil and drying the grass. An hour later, your own stomach rumbles with hunger, and you stand up. The kittens complain about the interruption of their snuggling. Breakfast is over. With a growl, you tell your three babies to stay in the brush, safely hidden from threats like coyotes and deer. The kittens scurry farther back into the bushes and begin wrestling and pouncing on solitary blades of grass. Sitting up with a large yawn and a long, languid stretch of your front legs and then your back legs, you step out from under the cover of the bushes and into the spindly forest of grass. Looking across the fields and the hillsides, you listen and scan for signs of something to eat. Your ears flick and rotate, hearing quail, ravens, and red-winged blackbirds. The grass tips brush your shoulders and face as you step forward. A gopher or vole would be the easiest catch this morning, but a snake, lizard, or bird would make a fine breakfast as well if one presented itself. You begin to walk slowly into the tall grass, quickly disappearing. Water soaks your paws and sharp foxtails catch on your coat. You stop with irritation to flick water off your front paw and then use your back foot to scratch at a tick that has lodged itself on your temple. Annoying. Eventually it will fall off, but these small parasites are distracting and you wish they would stop hitchhiking a ride latched onto your flesh. The empty rumble in your stomach is more persistent as you haven't had much to eat the last 2 days. Hunting was difficult yesterday in high winds, and coyotes came and interrupted your hunt last evening. The wind was blowing their scent away from you, so you didn't smell them as early as you typically could. Instead, you saw them when they were just 100 yards away, frighteningly close. Your heart thumping, you sprinted into the bushes, crouched low to the ground, and tried to make yourself invisible. You watch them with their noses fixated on the earth, following your scent trail and coming ever closer to your hiding place. As they approached the bushes where you hid, one of their family members howled in the distance, and they turned to move towards the call, answering with their own wistful song. A wave of relief washed over your body before you realized that they had moved in the direction of your kittens, and you pushed your way through the thick brush to find a hidden way back to check on your babies. At just 3 months old, they are quite vulnerable. Thankfully, you found them safely dozing in a pile. Coyotes have been known to chase you and steal your prey in the past. You decided it wasn't worth the risk to attempt another hunt last night, and you laid down beside your babies. Between nursing the kittens and bringing prey back to them, there has been little for you to eat yourself. Yesterday morning, you wolfed down one gopher, but that's all you've had to sustain you. Hunting in tall grass and high winds is hard work. The resistance drains your body of energy, and it is harder to maintain your focus on hunting while also being alert for dangers and threats in challenging conditions. Walking further into the field to find breakfast, the fur on your back absorbs and reflects the heat of the intense summer sun. A red-tailed hawk circles overhead, soaring on the updrafts of wind. Unlike you, they seem to savor the thrill of high winds. White-crowned sparrows call out an exuberant melody from the barbed wire fence line. Your head swivels as you hear a gopher tugging at the roots of a clump of grass 20 yards to your right. You quickly trot in the direction of the sound, eager to get a meal. When you get close to the gopher hole, you lower your body to the ground and slink forward, slowly, muscles taut. And when you are quite close to the hole, you flatten down to the ground completely, ears plastered against the side of your head and eyes fixated on the opening in the dirt. You can feel vibrations in the soil in your stomach muscles as the gopher moves in the underground tunnel. Time passes. 30 minutes later, and still you lie motionless, waiting. Just then you hear a scraping and know that the gopher is moving towards the surface. You have just a fraction of a second to propel yourself forward and grab the gopher by the back of the neck with your jaws. Muscles twitching, you leap, nose into the hole, but end up with a face covered in dirt and no gopher. Shaking off the failure, you begin to walk away slowly, listening and scanning for another opportunity. Given your petite size, you are also always on the alert for danger. As you continue onwards, there is little sign of any potential prey. Hoping to get a better vantage point, you jump up onto the top of a wooden fence post, and taking a quick look around, you notice a flock of quail in the bushes a short distance away. Quickly jumping down, you creep silently towards the coyote brush. The quail are chittering and cooing and don't seem to have noticed your presence. So once again, you flatten down soundlessly and wait, and wait. The quail move around on the ground while one male stays at the top of the bush, a sentry. Luckily, he hasn't spotted you. Eventually, one of the quail moves around the base of the bush and wanders in front of you. Boom, you leap, propelled by strong back legs, and this time you are successful. The rest of the flock lifts from the ground in a thunderous cacophony of wings and flies away. A bird in your mouth, you trot back towards the kittens. Hunger stops you, however, and you sit down to eat the quail. It takes mere seconds to rip it apart and consume it. And I'll stop there for today. There's more to that piece, but that's enough, I think.
Oh, it's so mesmerizing. I just love it. I really appreciate how your storytelling really educates people. I think it's such a great way to learn about the behavior and challenges of the bobcat. And this is from your Substack, is that right?
Yes, this was part of my June Substack newsletter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. So I'd love to hear about, I know that you spent thousands of hours in the field. So would you tell us about that? How many years you've been observing bobcats in particular, and why you feel a really special connection to these animals? And I know that this writing comes from like really deep observation to make us feel like we're experiencing the bobcat's environment. So love to hear you talk about your time in the field, how many hours you spent observing the bobcat. I know it probably is hard to quantify, but would just love to hear more about that if you can kind of share and put it in context how long you've been observing these animals.
Yeah, been, I would say, pretty concerted for about 14 years now, in different locations. I'm in Northern California and various places. And then more specifically, certain bobcats that I've been following very closely, it's been about 7 years.
Mhm.
But yes, hundreds, probably thousands of hours with them. And it's um, it's hard to describe. I think for me, and everybody has different species that sort of resonate with them at their core. There's something about bobcats that is just magnetic to me. They are so beautiful and so strong, also so patient. I think that's the thing I've learned from bobcats is patience. Because when I'm in the field, my goal is to not impact in any way the behavior. And so I am going to find a place to be quiet and low and observe. But that means if the bobcat is sitting waiting on a hole for 45 minutes, that I'm somewhere in the field sitting waiting those 45 minutes as well. And, there may be, if she's a good hunter, she's successful, maybe a third of the time.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of misses. And so, you can spend many, many hours watching the hunt and or waiting. There's a lot of waiting in wildlife photography, generally speaking.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And I know I've had the pleasure of hearing you writing in some of our writing groups that we shared together. And so one of the things that came up was the word fieldcraft and and really, I mean, becoming intimate with your own animal nature, the way I see it, in order to develop intimacy with animals that you photograph and spend time with. So, would you share a little bit about that? Like, how do you ethically track these animals? What is the distance, that you make sure you have between you and them? How do you get these incredible images while still maintaining a respectful distance? And also just would love to hear a little bit about, you know, how you build intimacy with their habitat, with their environment through fieldcraft.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pieces to unpack in that question. So I'll start with the idea of fieldcraft um, and really understanding that wildlife photography is about so much more than taking a picture of a subject. There is, I mean, anyone at any level of photography, I encourage to really get to know the species, to research it. And research is reading, but also observation, even before you're attempting or thinking about taking a photo, really understanding what behavior you can expect, what body language to look for in terms of stress, because for me, not causing any species stress is really important. But if I don't know what stress looks like, then I don't have any way of assessing, whether they're stressed or they aren't. And certainly, there are studies on this. There are things that show stress that we can't visually see, like cortisol levels, but there are things you can see. So bobcats have a whole sequence of behaviors that show degrees of stress. And so when I'm watching a bobcat, I can assess to what extent they're stressed. And, my goal is to not stress an animal. If I think an animal is stressed by my presence, then that's my cue to back away or to leave altogether. And so for bobcats, the first move is to hide, is to just flatten down and become invisible, hopefully. That's what they hope. Um, it- Sometimes there's a moment where they flatten down and then they sit back up, and then you watch their ears. So if you have a domestic cat, you may have seen your cat turn one or both ears back sort of to the side. That's annoyance. And so the level of annoyance is the number. It's like an ear rating system. If it's one ear, it's a little annoyed. If it's a two ear, then it's a really annoyed cat. Similarly, cats twitch their tails when they're concentrating or when they're annoyed. So you can watch for that. And then, of course, an extremely stressed bobcat will just run away, which is body language. I'm sure, anybody could read and know that that's a stress sign. But different species, like I said, have different behaviors that indicate stress. Owls sometimes flutter or puff their throat. Bears will clack their jaws or sort of have like frothing like spittle in the corner of their mouth. So there's different things that animals do when they're feeling threatened. And so one thing that's really important is, for ethical photography is to understand the species that you're hoping to photograph and to really understand what the signs of stress are. Um, and then there's understanding the ecosystem. So for people who've read What the Robin Knows, and the idea of a sit spot or having intimacy with a place, and it can be your backyard, it can be your local park. It doesn't have to be like, a fabulous, famous wildlife destination. It can be anywhere. But it helps you understand what we would call baseline, which is sort of what does this ecosystem look like uninterrupted, undisturbed? What are the typical species? What are the typical sounds? What are the typical smells? And when you see the same place time over time, season after season, you understand the flow of wind and moisture and vegetation growth and all these different things that have an impact on any species because everything in an ecosystem is interrelated, right? So the timing of the vegetation might affect the herbivores, but that's going to affect the predators so there's a whole cycle. And so understanding and being really familiar with a place also helps know when something is shifted or if something is different. It also helps you understand, what might be a good photo opportunity if you know enough about a species to know. For example, I know that bobcats sometimes, either to avoid a threat or to get a better view for hunting, will jump up on a fence post. So if I know that and I see a cat in the vicinity of a post, I'm getting ready when it comes to my photography settings for that post shot, right, with the cat on the top of a post. So um, you also asked about getting in touch with my own animal nature, and I think it's one of the things I enjoy so much about the storytelling and not just the photography, but the time in the field, which is really tapping in to what I would say is our animal senses of our ways of knowing things that are perhaps not in the forefront of our brain most of the time in the modern world and really being attuned to things like scent and sound, listening for calls, alarm calls from birds, for example, calls between other species, um, tracking scat, and really letting your intuition guide you in terms of the presence of other living things. It's really a very engaging and rewarding piece of the work.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. I mean, such a perfect illustration of how our creative practices, whether writing or photography, and from an ethical standpoint, obviously, and it just requires really such deep, deep listening to our ecosystem, our environment, our subject. And really, really, I mean, I think the way you said it is so perfect, connects us to our own animal nature through this rich sensory experience and really, really, really paying attention. Just so beautiful how the bobcat has taught you so much in that way. So I know
Yeah.
you have photos to share with us. Would
Yeah.
you be willing to do that now? And I guess you're not showing off your video, unfortunately, but would love to see some of the photographs and to talk through the moment that you shot them.
Sure. So let's try. I've moved locations, and so my apologies again for the hiccup, but we'll see if I can share with my video still going. We'll see how we go. Okay. Um, Continue to share. Okay, so you see the mother and the kitten again?
Yes, such an amazing photo.
All right, so I will scroll somewhat quickly past Mama Bobcat and her kittens, as much as I love them. I think we were here when I was unfortunately disconnected.
Sure.
So speaking of time, I put this photo in the slideshow, one, because I love anytime I can have a beautiful animal backlit on rocks. I'm super excited because I love the contrast of the soft fur and the sort of crunchy, hard rock, the cool tones and the warm tones, like all of those things. But these particular rocks I had been looking at for literally 15 years, hoping to someday see a lot of the birds would perch on the top of this, red-tailed hawks, kestrels, ravens, but was really hoping for predators. And so about a year and a half ago, I got a coyote who was sitting obligingly on the rocks. And so I was able to photograph that. And then just in the last year, had a moment where this female bobcat got up on the rocks. And I was super excited to be able to photograph her in this setting. So this is bobcat kitten on the left, and then these are two coyote pups on the right. This is a slightly older coyote pup as well.
And where were these taken? Are these all
These are all taken in Northern California, either Marin or Sonoma counties, many of them in the Point Reyes National Seashore, but not all of them. This is a coyote with mange. And, a lot of the work that I do around coexistence is education and things that we do as humans that impact wildlife. And so talking about mange and sort of what happens and how it got into the ecosystem and the challenges with treating it and things like that is part of the storytelling work that I do when I do public speaking. Another bobcat. This is another little female bobcat. This is a gray fox kit in an abandoned barn.
ah,
I love fox kits.
oh my gosh, adorable.
And then some other species from here. I think one of the things that I try to convey in my writing and in my photography is the level of connectivity between animals and other species. I think we often believe as humans that we are so different and so far apart and above these other species and deny that they might have levels of not just intelligence, but emotions and connectivity and bonds. And so they're they're sentient beings and they have bonds undoubtedly. They experience grief and other things. And so particularly with predators, because they're so often misunderstood and maligned, I love showing the tender moments, the bonds, the connections, the sweetness. They are so misunderstood. I like to sort of counter the dominant narrative. We all see the posts on Nextdoor about coyotes or bobcats and mountain lions and a lot of the alarmist language that's used. And so these are elephant seals, but the similar concept, right? I mean, this is a pup nuzzling against its mother, right? And I mean, they literally both look like they're smiling. So there's undoubtedly a bond there. This is a young badger. Another thing I love to highlight is the playfulness of wild animals, of other species. We are not the only ones who play, and badgers love to grab bits of grass and sticks and other things and wrestle and tug on them. And so included this for that. And then these are badger kits. Another issue in coexistence that I end up talking about is rodenticides. So this is a great gray owl flying in with prey. But secondary poisoning is a huge threat to predators as well as raptors, people poisoning a variety of species of rodents that ultimately then kill the animals that are preying on the rodents. This is a species that I adore. It's the Hawaiian goose, the nene. It's a federally threatened species. You can see one of the adults is banded, but again, you see the young gosling protected by the parent. And these are coastal wolves, the coast of British Columbia, an adult and a pup. I am fascinated by the coastal wolves and the adaptations in a marine ecosystem of wolves. I love wolves in general, but wolves at the beach is sort of the ultimate thing. And these are lions in Tanzania. And again, I just love the expression on this lion cub's face as it looks at its mother, his or her mother, I don't know which. This is a cheetah with her cub. They were having a little napping and grooming session. So mom's cleaning the babe. It's a never-ending task for mothers, keeping their babies clean and safe, especially cat mothers. These are servals, also in Africa, mother and a kitten. This is a puma from Patagonia, and her mouth in this shape is her actually calling to her kittens, her cubs actually. They were about a year old, a little over a year old, and mountain lions keep their cubs with them for 2 years. So she was calling them to her. This is a different mountain lion mom with a baby, also in Patagonia. And that's it. Those are the photos I have to share.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Sure.
I see Amelia's hand raised. Did you want to
Well,
share something?
I don't know how that happened. I apologize for that. I think
Oh,
I'm
no worries.
one of
These are just such incredible photos, and I love the relational aspect of the photos, especially the babies with their parents, and using these photos for advocacy. So I would love for you to, speak a little more about that. I mean, how do you see photographs becoming a form of advocacy? Um, I know that you pair them often with speaking and lectures and education, but I mean, obviously, photos themselves can really move people and evoke empathy. So I just you just speak about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've all heard a picture's worth a thousand words, right? And I think one of the challenges in conservation, well, there are a number of challenges in the current moment, but one of the challenges is just how how dry and sometimes depressing the statistics and information can be. And I think it's easy to not feel pulled in or not feel motivated to do something when it's words and numbers sometimes, especially in the current environment where it feels like there's so much bad news. It's hard to know what to do. And I think that overwhelm can almost lead to indifference.
Mm,
And I think that for me, what's helped me consistently is to just focus on local things, local species, local issues, and really devote my storytelling to these campaigns and causes and species that are here in California. And in doing that, what I really hope to do is touch people's hearts
mm,
because that's what motivates somebody to write a letter to their representative or to write a letter to the editor of their local paper or even just to chat with their neighbors and say, "Hey, did you know when a coyote walks along behind you and your dog, it's not stalking you, it's called escorting." And escorting just means they've got a den in the area and they want to make sure that you leave and don't come close to it. It's not a threat. So anything I can do to touch people in a way that even one conversation happens because of that, I'm thrilled. And I think that videos and photographs can convey so much more emotional content than words on a page. Even though I love the words on the page and I love the writing, I think there's different things gleaned from each, but especially around conservation issues, because I think again, challenging issue for conservation is like people don't generally like being told what to do. And people have a hard time changing behavior, right? So you're kind of on an uphill battle with the words sometimes anyway, it feels like. But when you show somebody an image and you say, this baby animal is who dies if we don't change what we're doing, this baby animal will no longer be in your neighborhood or in your ecosystem, or when you go on a hike, they're going to be gone, and that whole ecosystem will suffer if they're gone. That hits people differently than the statistics sometimes.
that is so, so true. Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, speaking of images and overwhelm, I know that we've talked about social media as both a pro and a con for wildlife. So I'd love for you to reflect on how social media can be a positive impact. I know that you have a presence there and can be used as a tool for education, but also there's very negative aspects too. So, would love for you to reflect on that too.
Yeah, I would say I have a complicated relationship with social media as a general rule. Social media has the capacity to spread information and raise awareness in some pretty amazing ways. 50 years ago, you needed a newspaper or a magazine or the local TV channel. You needed somebody else to quote, pick up a story before you had an audience past your friends and family, basically. And now anybody who wants to, whether it's YouTube channels or Instagram or Facebook, whatever thing people are using or want to use, you have the ability to reach thousands and thousands of people, and it's instantaneous, right? I mean, if something is happening, if something bad is happening, and you want to rally people to go to an event or to write a letter right away because the vote is in 3 days, there's this capacity to generate really impactful campaigns through social media and get a message out and raise awareness using powerful images of, whether it's the negative environmental impact of something, whether it's a hunting related or wildlife killing contest related. I mean, there's so many different issues that one photo is so impactful because people don't have any idea something is happening and they have no idea the horrors that might be behind it. And then they see an image and it becomes much more motivating. And so I think there is a lot of good. I personally, in the environmental work that I do, I use my Instagram stories all the time to promote local events, coastal cleanups, to promote coexistence workshops, to encourage people to attend different events in the Bay Area, to share stories that I'm working on, things that I'm concerned about. So there is definitely a positive side to social media from a getting the word out, having an audience, having a following, building connections. I've gotten connected with people, including magazine editors, via social media over the years. And so there's definitely good there. It also comes with some very well documented negatives. And a lot of people, talk about our shorter attention spans and doom scrolling and like all the, so I'm not even going to touch that piece of it. I would say from a photography standpoint, the harms have been largely around photos becoming even more of a potential trophy in some sense. In other words, the getting the shot when you now have an audience to project it to and therefore get feedback from, it's sort of ramped up the stakes, I think, for people wanting to get the shot. And not everybody is going to do that in an ethical way. The other thing about social media is that it can very quickly communicate the location of an animal or a family. And it's very, very disturbing and disruptive to see what can happen in a matter of days when somebody puts a location on social media, or even sometimes posting a photo with a landmark that people can recognize, even if they're just familiar with the area. I mean, you'd be surprised, but people post photographs in Point Reyes, and I can tell from the trees where in Point Reyes that photo was taken, right? And I'm not the only person who can do that. And so you have the ability to suddenly have dozens of people descend on a nest, for example. And so it's particularly harmful and upsetting to see when it's nests and den sites, which are super sensitive and often interfere with the protection of the babies, the feeding of the babies, the parents' ability to move freely to and from their nest or den. There's a lot of negative things that have happened around nest and den sites in the Bay Area because of crowds. And so I think the sort of FOMO, fear of missing out, everybody wanting to go see the thing, and it's understandable. A lot of these are really cute, amazing species that would be cool to see, but the pressure that's created is so detrimental and it happens so quickly. Um, so I think, it's a challenge. And then the other thing about social media is sometimes it's really hard for people to know whether something is ethical or not. And so you end up with people having images being liked where those people might have used bait, they might have used calls, they might even be captive animals taken in a wildlife game farm. And I'm a firm believer in truth in captioning. So I don't photograph captive wildlife except when I do photography for local wildlife rehabilitation centers or with local wildlife biologists who are in the field and therefore handling the wildlife. But it's always in my caption, the full description of how I'm obtaining a photo in that situation. But a lot of folks, again, I understand you want people to see a beautiful image. The desire, as humans, we want to be liked and accepted. And there's ego that, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, as a human being, we all have an ego, and that ego wants positive feedback. I mean, that's just part of our wiring. And so I think social media sort of plays into that in a dangerous way.
Yeah, that is a lot to unpack and to take in. I mean, I just wonder what can people do? I mean, I think on one hand, what you're saying is the positive impacts of amplifying the message of advocacy, but there's also obviously such an overwhelming amount of content and one of the things going back to an earlier answer about like being hyper local, I think is so powerful because obviously there's this we could have a whole webinar on social media and screens, but being so hands-on and building intimacy with your local environment is really, really powerful, something that you can tangibly feel and build a connection with and build intimacy with versus, being on a screen, which is completely overwhelming. So I mean, I know it's a difficult question to answer. What advice do you have, first of all, for people, and I want to go to audience questions shortly, but who want to engage in ethical storytelling, for one, and maybe it's in relationship with their local ecosystem or writing or photography. And then two, what do we do if we suspect unethical storytelling? Do you have any guidance for that? I mean, I know there's organizations like Project Coyote we can turn to, but we might not have time to get to the full answer to that question. But yeah, just some guidelines, for people who really want to, engage in storytelling, whether it's photography, filmmaking, or writing. And then what can we do if you know, if our spidey senses feel like something is off?
Yeah. Those are great questions. And in my earlier answer, I didn't even touch on AI and all of the fake
Oh my gosh.
imagery and videos that are being passed off as if they actually happened, which
Yeah.
is a whole other other concern. I think, the most important thing is to approach any session in the field with respect and empathy. Respect for everything else, everyone else in that ecosystem, the land, the other humans who are around, all the other species there. Having respect and then empathy, really trying to put yourself in the shoes of your subject and how you would feel if someone were behaving that way towards you. You think about it, a wild, animal's perspective, whether it's a bobcat or a badger, if you were sitting at your dinner table and 15 photographers showed up into your dining room and surrounded you and started taking photos, how many people have to fill your dining room before you stand up from the table and walk away? Is it five? Is it 10? Is it 15? But at some point, there's a tremendous amount of pressure that's incredibly uncomfortable and feels very intrusive, even if maybe one person sitting at the table next to you with a camera might not have bothered you very much. So I think trying to put yourself in the position of your potential subject is always helpful as an exercise. I mean, I spend most of my time in the field trying to pretend I am, get inside the head and get in the fur, get in the feathers of the wildlife that I'm with. Um, and then, on a baseline from an ethics standpoint, obviously, I would say nothing that changes behavior intentionally. So no baiting, no food, no feeding wildlife, no using calls or scent attractants, and not joining a crowd, honestly. not joining other photographers in the field. It's not just the impact to a photographer who might lose out on a shot if an animal gets stressed by more people joining them, but it's just it's the impact on an animal to have one person nearby or two people nearby, and then suddenly there's 10 or 12. I mean, it's an order of magnitude that causes huge changes in behavior, including causing species to abandon den sites and move their young and move babies to potentially less safe locations. This spring, I had a really unfortunate situation here where we had a badger den, and unfortunately, the location was known, and there were some people who were on it 8 hours a day, every day for 2 weeks. Very close, much closer than I would have said was ethical. And eventually, most of the time, there were, like I said, 10 or 12 people on this badger, and then mama with babies. And then one morning, badger dens are a mound of dirt in a grassy field, and there was grass all around the mound of dirt. And at some point, a photographer felt that that grass was interfering with their photos of the kits. And so they went up and cut the grass in front of the badger den. And
Ah,
and I've heard stories of multiple nests in the Bay Area where people have gone and pruned branches in front of the nest to get a better photo. And when you damage the environs of a nest or a den site, I mean, really anything in the ecosystem, but particularly where you're talking about camouflaging babies, it is so horrifying and disturbing. And so you know, obviously don't do things like that for the sake of the photo. The well-being of the animals is more important than any photo you will ever take. It's never worth sacrificing the life of your subject or their babies. Um, and then, there's a lot to do in terms of reading and ethics. NAMPA has an amazing ethics. We have a whole, basically long ethics guide to field ethics now that NAMPA has put out. It's a huge document, like hundreds of pages for different scenarios for guidance for photographers on how to really try and minimize having a negative impact. But, truth in captioning, avoiding captive wildlife. And I know I'm still going on, but I do have to put a shout out. So there is a documentary film Captured that has just come out. I was able to attend the world premiere in Telluride in May, but Melissa Grew, who is a Project Coyote ambassador, is in this film about game farms. And there is a website, wildlifewithoutwalls.com, where you can take a pledge not to shoot captive wildlife, not to take images of them, not to support them, not to promote images or use images. So, one of the things that happens is, and the last part of your question, Vanessa, about what do you do if you see something that's unethical, depends what it is. I always try and follow the advice of praise in public, criticize in private. And so if I see an image that I have questions about, that's a private message to the person. And I start from a place of curiosity, of trying to understand, maybe. And it depends who it is, whether it's comfortable to have that conversation. Um, in the instance of the badger den, I unfortunately was in the field that day. And so I was around I mean, I wasn't at the den site. I was in a different location, but somebody told me it had happened. And so I walked out there and I had a conversation with everybody who was standing there at the den site about the fact that those babies could die because somebody didn't want grass in their photos. And sure enough, the mom did end up moving those babies. I don't blame her. I'm frankly glad she did, but it might have been to a less safe location where they could be preyed on by coyotes or other badgers or other things. So um, yeah, there's a lot to it, a lot of mindfulness. But if you start from a place of respect and empathy, you're generally guided in the right direction.
mm. Thank you so much for that. There's so much to think about. And I know we only have a few minutes, but just to bring us back quickly to your original point is to learn about the species and their ecosystem, right? Before even attempting to approach them. So I think, yeah, well, so much to think about. It'd be great to share links and information in a follow-up email. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Sarah. I know we can just talk for hours, but I'm going to pass it over to Amelia to give us some time for audience questions. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. This has been a really incredible conversation, and we have some really, really great audience questions. So, just kind of going off of what we were just talking about captive animals, ethical photography, are there any protections for animals against unethical photography, or and how can observers kind of help these like captive farm sanctuaries where people go and take pictures? Are there any protections at all for them?
Oh, there's a long answer to that. The short version is that there are relatively few protections in a variety of settings, but when it comes to photography, in most places there are prohibitions on quote unquote harassing wildlife, right? And so it depends by jurisdiction what that looks like, but typically it's defined as changing behavior. So in California, feeding wildlife comes under the guise of harassment of wildlife and is prohibited. But, the rules are going to vary by jurisdiction and location. And with respect to the game farms, unfortunately, and it's true in a couple different ways in this country, but federal agencies are tasked with the oversight. So weirdly, it's the USDA that looks over captive animals. They're really designed to be looking at livestock, but they end up with the oversight of things like game farms. And so, which I think they very clearly don't want, but they have. You will see, if you want to know more about the game farm issue, Rolling Stone did a great article about Melissa and some of the issues that are in the film Captured. Um, I don't want to spoil the ending of Captured, but yeah, the consequences are not necessarily what you would hope they would be in these situations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll try to put a link into the article. I just found it so everyone can read it.
Great.
And
Thank you for that.
of course, check out Captured on social media and online. Um, a couple people had questions about, more techniques of your photography. And so what gear do you use? And people asked if you use hides and have you followed the same bobcat family over several years?
Okay. In terms of gear, I don't generally use hides, in part because I focus primarily on predator species, all of which can smell me even if they can't see me. So my general strategy is to find a bush or a rock or a fence post, something in the landscape to put myself against to make myself sort of small and not stick out. There's a great, it's been a while now, but several years back, Melissa and another photographer, Daniel Dietrich, and I did a Project Coyote webinar on an ethical approach to predator photography. So that has a lot of tips on field behavior and sort of how to approach photographing, bobcats, coyotes, and things like that. I will say my takeaway for everyone today would be that anytime I've had a quote unquote close-ish encounter with any wild species, it's been on that animal's terms. In other words, it is never me approaching that him or her. It's an animal that is choosing its own course and its own path. And if it ends up walking by me as a result of that or hunting in proximity to where I am, that's it, his or her choice. It's not me approaching. Um, what was the second part of the question, Amelia? I know I'm missing a piece. Sorry.
Have you followed the same bobcat family over several years?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate to have been in the same geographic area now for quite a long time. And so I have a group of local bobcats that I have been able to follow as they started out as young, sort of, subadults and got older and had their own kittens. There's one male now that he's gotten quite old and sort of tattered, and I think my best guess is that he's 8. I can't ever know for certain how old, a cat is when I first see them. I mean, unless I can tell that it's a kitten, but I can usually tell if it's a young adult. They have a slightly younger looking face still for a little while. And so, but it could be 1 or 2 when I first see them, and then I can add the years on from that. So, yeah.
Amazing. It's really cool. I know we're right up on time, but a couple people were asking about your writing. So how do you choose what sensory details? How do you choose to tell those stories? And what are your thoughts on anthropomorphizing animals for the purpose of storytelling?
That's a great question. And I can stay on, so I don't mind going over a little bit. I don't know about Vanessa, but uh, so I think we in the West have had this distinction of humans and every other species on the planet, and this idea that we as humans experience all these emotions and states of being that other species do not is a really an interesting question of why that came about and is it true? For those of you who are readers, and I'm a voracious reader, Michael Pollan's new book, A World Appears, is fascinating. And it's all about consciousness and what that is, how do you define it, and how it's created, where it is in the brain, all sorts of really interesting things. But I think what I would say is that long ago, science, I mean, we're going back to like Galileo, science took the view of only looking at, quote, objective data. And anything that was subjective or experiential or emotional was sort of the realm of the church. And to avoid getting in trouble with the church at the time, the scientists kind of kept this very strict cold data analysis. And because animals were often used in experiments and other things, there was this view of them as different, as objectified, as an extractive relationship. And the more and more research that's being done now, the more scientists are seeing, oh, orcas do grieve, elephants grieve. There's so many species experience emotions that we would ascribe thinking maybe perhaps they're human. And so anthropomorphizing is something that I'm always aware of, but I also think that we have generally gone so far on the opposite end of the spectrum when we think about other species. And we share far more of our landscape internally of experiences than we probably think we do. Um, Again, I highly recommend Michael Pollan's new book, but he talks about, why do everything, when you look at a species, whether it's humans or anybody else, we are going to be evolving for survival, right? So like the traits that we have, and if you've read An Immense World by Ed Yong, you see the development of traits. Eyes are developed in different places in different species, but accomplishing the same thing, which is sight. And in consciousness, there's so many different ways to come at this idea that different species experience emotions, but the emotions at their core serve a survival purpose. So when you feel anger, when you feel fear, that's a prompt that causes you to do something different, which is generally, again, from a strictly, sort of biological standpoint, for survival. So you're afraid, so you're going to go away from something, or you're angry and you're going to do something to defend yourself. But it's to protect what you can think of as like homeostasis. You need a certain body temperature, you need food, you need water. Certain things are necessary for life. You need oxygen. And so some of our reactions, and it's not just instinctual, are in fact a way to try and keep us alive. And there isn't any reason that every other species couldn't have those same things develop to help keep him or her alive. So I think I'm always mindful of not attributing my own subjective experience to anyone else, human or otherwise. And at the same time, there's a lot that we share. And I think it's far more than we typically would think about or talk about.
It's a really beautiful answer, and I think that's something that's really important for people to understand is our wild neighbors are they're like us. They feel, they grieve. You see it in the photos as well. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're kind of coming up on time. There are a few more questions, but if you really want your question answered, feel free to email us at info@projectcoyote.org and we'll make sure to answer it or direct you to the right person to answer it. And thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia. And thank you so much, Sarah. This was a really incredible conversation. So much to think about and integrate and research. So I really, really appreciate your time and energy and also your amazing photos. So I'm sure we'll follow up with an email with links to your Substack and Instagram and also some of the articles and books that you mentioned. So thank you again so much. And thank you all for coming and sharing and all your comments. Really, really appreciate it. This was a very rich conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa, and thank you to everyone who came and stayed. It's such an interesting and important topic, and I'm thrilled to have been able to talk about it with everybody today. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. See you all
Okay,
soon.
bye.
Bye.